All right, let's just state the obvious. We have a massive affordable housing crisis. At the same time, we have banks sitting on literally trillions of dollars. So today, we're going to dig into a pretty provocative idea that connects those two things. What if we just let the banks build the houses?
So let's start with a number that is just kind of hard to even wrap your head around. Trillions. That's how much capital U.S. banks are controlling right now. And when you have that kind of money floating around in the system, it really begs a pretty obvious and honestly a pretty urgent question.
I mean, it's a huge paradox, right? The money is definitely there. So where are the homes? And the answer, it turns out, isn't really a lack of cash. It's the incredibly complicated maze we've built just to get that money from the bank vault to an actual construction site.
Okay, so let's get into it. The main tool we use right now is a federal program you might have heard of. It's called the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit, or LIHTC for short. And its goal is super simple, but how it actually works, well, that's a whole other story. So here's the gist of how it's supposed to work. The IRS hands out tax credits to states, then the states award those credits to developers to help them fund affordable housing projects. Seems pretty straightforward, right? But the actual journey that money takes, yeah, it's anything but simple. See, this whole process is super indirect. A developer can't just, cash in a tax credit. They have to sell it to an investor. And to do that, they usually have to hire a middleman, a syndicator, who takes a cut. So think about it. At every single step, from the state to the syndicator to the investor, another piece of that funding gets shaved right off the top. By the time the money actually gets to the project itself, it's been seriously watered down. And all those extra steps, they create a ton of friction. And we're not just talking about some annoying paperwork here. We're talking about real-world impacts. Higher costs for everything, projects that get slowed way down, and huge legal and accounting fees that just bleed the budgets dry. And get this, even after a building is finally up, it's still tangled up in decades of administrative red tape. Okay, so if the current system is this winding, super inefficient maze, what's the alternative? Well, the solution being proposed argues for something radically simple. Just replace it with a straight line, a direct path from the money to the building site.
And this chart really just gets right to the heart of the idea. On one side, you've got our current Rube Goldberg machine of a system, and on the other, you have a simple, streamlined model. The big idea is that if you let a bank be both the one funding the project and the one developing it, you create this direct, predictable pipeline for the money. And that gets rid of all that friction and all those extra costs from the old way of doing things.
So, here's the absolute core of it. Change the rules. Let the institutions that literally hold all the capital also be the ones who build the housing. It's basically about vertically integrating the entire process to chop out all that expensive, time-consuming complexity.
Now, this is a really powerful idea for sure, but it's not exactly a simple fix. It would mean we'd have to rewrite some pretty fundamental banking regulations, rules that have kept the business of banking separate from other commercial stuff for a very, very long time.
And this quote really nails the problem. The main roadblock is a law called the Bank Holding Company Act. And what it does is it basically forbids banks from getting into non-banking activities. So they can loan money to a developer, but they can't be the developer. It's that legal wall that forces this whole complicated system of middlemen to exist in the first place.
So to actually make this happen, proponents say there are 3 key changes needed. First, you've got to amend that Bank Holding Company Act to make a special exception just for affordable housing. Second, you let banks set up specialized subsidiaries to handle the development work. And third, you modernize the Community Reinvestment Act so that they get major credit for doing this kind of direct development.
Okay, but let's be real. Whenever you start talking about changing major banking laws, the first question on everyone's mind, and it's a really important one, is about risk. I mean, how do you let banks jump into a whole new business like real estate development without, putting the entire financial system in jeopardy?
Well, the proposed answer is all about creating a really strong firewall. The idea is that banks would have to set up totally separate, dedicated subsidiaries just for housing development. So all the risk, construction issues, market downturns, all that stuff is contained inside that separate company. This puts a protective wall around the main bank, and most importantly, its depositors' money, shielding it from any losses. And the whole thing would still be under tight regulatory oversight.
And this whole idea isn't just being pulled out of thin air. There are actually state-level examples that show this kind of thing can work. Take Virginia, where state-chartered banks can already invest up to 5% of their assets in real estate. Or look at Michigan, which is even more flexible, allowing up to 10%. So these precedents kind of show that direct investment is something that can be managed safely inside a regulated system.
All right, so we've talked about how it would work and the safety measures you'd need. Now let's get to the really exciting part, the payoff. Why do the people who support this think it could be a total game changer?
Probably the single biggest argument here is just tapping into that massive pool of capital in the banking sector. And we're not talking about some huge pivot in their business model. As you can see, if we dedicated even a tiny fraction of their total assets to this, it would unleash this incredible wave of new, stable funding for affordable housing, way more than the current tax credit system could ever hope to provide.
And the potential benefits would just ripple out from there. I mean, you get rid of the middleman, which cuts costs and speeds up construction. Banks get to use their in-house financial smarts and risk management skills directly on the projects. And this doesn't push experienced developers out of the picture, it actually empowers them. Instead of spending all their time trying to stitch together complicated financing, they could just partner with a bank for one reliable source of capital. That lets them focus on what they're actually great at, building.
And this quote really captures the ultimate mindset shift here. For decades, a lot of banks have looked at community investment as just a compliance burden, a box they have to check for the regulators. This whole proposal is about transforming that, turning it from a chore into a strategic and even profitable business opportunity. Which, leaves us with this final, really big question. It's a bold idea, for sure. It has some very real regulatory hurdles and risks that would need to be managed carefully. But by completely rethinking the rules, it forces us to ask, could the solution to one of our biggest challenges as a society be hiding in plain sight this whole time? Right there inside the vaults of our biggest banks? It's a powerful thought.